Hello and welcome to the Stubborn Book Podcast. This is episode 1. My name is Bernadette and I'll be presenting each episode. There'll be 8 in a series. We have divided our book, Stubborn, by Andy Bob Cajun Junkin, into 8 podcasts so you can easily be able to listen to it on Spotify or whatever podcast platform you use. You'll be able to listen to it in bite-sized chunks and be able to pick up where you left off much more easily than if you had an audiobook app such as Audible. You'll be able to share it super easily as well with family and friends. And of course, best of all, it's completely free because it's just like any other podcast that you listen to. So we're going to start with the preface. It is a true story of a boy named Bobby who wanted to simply continue his family's legacy and farm with his family, but life took a different turn. I'm going to give you a trigger warning here. There is an attempted suicide. But this story also shows that good can and will come out of a bad situation. So let's have a listen now.
Stubborn. How to turn stubborn from a bad word to a good thing for your family business by Andy Cajun Junkin. Narrated by himself. Dedication. It is the soft issues that become hard problems in a family business. 30 years ago, I would have told you that was BS. As a result, I went through a lot of BS working with my family because I was wrong. This book is dedicated to hard-working business owners who rarely get time to read a book because they are too darn busy working their butts off to keep their families and family businesses together. I wrote this book so that all that hard work is not all for nothing.
The preface. Since he was 9 years old, he always signed of Bob Cajun after his name on any test or legal document. Bobby was intensely proud to be the 7th generation to farm in Bob Cajun. His name didn't matter, where he was from did. If you were to fly north over Bob Cajun, you'd see a one-stoplight town situated on 3 islands between 2 large lakes to the east and west. And Bobby's farm bordered the northern edge of the town with tiny green hay, wheat, and cornfields with picture-book stone fence lines that made the landscape look like a patchwork quilt. Bobby's family farmed the last cornfields before the ground turned into sheer bedrock and cedar swamps in the Appalachian-like region called the Canadian Shield. If you have ever been fishing in northern Ontario, this is where the Canadian wilderness starts. Stubborn family pride kept them farming the stony ground that their ancestors cleared back in 1832. Western Ontario farmers driving to their cottages in Bob Cajun often dismissed their family as fools for trying to grow corn on such rocky soil. But his family were known as proud, hardworking, and stubborn people. What caused his family to be able to farm this stony land for 7 generations was the fact that they were proud and stubborn. What caused them to fail in his generation was that they were too proud and were stubborn with each other. Nearly everyone in Bobby's hometown was his cousin, and the joke growing up was he had to go off to the University of Guelph to find a wife, rather than pick up a wife at a family reunion. Bobby's seemingly ideal childhood was given a swift kick in the pants when he decided to head off to college. A farewell and good luck would have been welcome, but Bobby left his hometown with a crushing ultimatum. His mom revealed to him that the farm was losing money quickly. "If you don't fix these numbers," she warned him, "I'm leaving your father." Bobby's mission wasn't just to earn an agricultural degree and find a wife. He had to find a way to save his family's farm. In the final semester of his agribusiness program, the students were assigned to write a business plan for their home farm. But Bobby approached the professor for guidance in his first semester and started working on it long before he was required to. Bobby went to class to meet girls, but he spent most of his time gleaning information and modern farming ideas from the university library so he could save the farm. This intensive search for answers forced the librarian to restrict his mess to his own little office cubicle on the 6th floor, usually reserved for graduate students. By the time he graduated from college, he had 5 plastic totes filled with files of photocopied research and ideas for improving his family's farm. He couldn't wait to give this business plan to his dad and was blown away when his dad looked at the cover, then threw it into the firebox. From that moment forward, father and son turned from best friends into worst enemies. Any idea Bobby had for improving the farm was quickly dismissed. It soon became obvious that his dad was against considering any new ideas to improve the farm unless it was his own idea. Desperate for change, Bobby and his mother begged his uncle to intervene. Finally, Uncle Claude stepped in and suggested to his younger brother, "Why don't you give the boy the field behind the barn? He can try his ideas out there where he can't hurt anything." That made sense to Bobby's dad. "If they work, great. Claude continued. You can expand it out to the rest of the farm in the future. If they don't work, then it's only a few acres sacrificed, and it's not a huge loss. Bobby's dad reluctantly agreed. By August, Uncle Claude had terminal cancer and could barely walk through Bobby's field with him, but it was obvious that he was impressed with his nephew. Claude asked Bobby some hard questions about his crazy business model and was met with some credible answers. Claude joked over dinner that his nephew was going to make more money from a few acres than his brother was with the entire farm that year. Claude was joking, of course, but his brother did not laugh along. Bobby came back to the farm a few days later to see that his dad had gone out to his field and plowed it under. There was no excuse for this behavior, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back between him and his dad. There was nothing but arguing thereafter. In the dark days after Uncle Claude passed, there was talk between Bobby's parents that they had to get a succession plan in place. The succession planner that was called out to the farm was there no more than 20 minutes when Bobby's dad walked out of the meeting, slamming the front door. He was angry, and so was Bobby's mom. She jumped out of her chair and yelled out across the yard as her husband was just getting into the old Chevy. Don't you dare buy any more farming equipment until you have made a business plan with your son. She was tired of the farm losing money and wanted to put a stop to it being a money pit. Did he listen to her? Well, he went off to an auction sale and won the bid for a manure spreader. He came home with that manure spreader, and I guess you could say the fit hit the shan that day. 3 days later, Bobby's mom left the separation papers on the ping-pong table in their garage. Bobby went and worked a myriad of odd jobs ranging from feeding goats to cowboying on a 3 million acre station in Australia. After it was clear that his dad didn't want anything to do with him, he founded an agriculture environmental software company by pretending to be a student to use University of Guelph Library as his office, and sleeping that winter in his car in 2 sleeping bags to keep warm. Without owning a computer, he managed to convince investors to provide $250,000 in venture capital, and only 4 years later, he had 68% control of a company that employed 15 people and was worth $4 million. Everyone thought ISO Farm Inc. was the next big thing. In 2004, cattle prices were at an all-time low in Canada due to mad cow disease, and Bobby's dad was about to lose everything with his divorce. He knew Bobby had sold 1% of his company's stock and bought a new executive class car. His dad gave him an ultimatum. If you don't come home to take over the farm right now, I'm going to be forced to sell everything. When Bobby got the call, he walked out of the office, leaving his company to implode. He could have led ISO Farm Inc. for a few more years and sold it, being able to afford many farms. But all he wanted to do was take over the home farm that his ancestors cleared back in 1832. 3 months after coming home to farm with his dad, the topic of money came up. Bobby's dad was disgusted when he realized that Bobby's shares were now worth nothing because he simply walked out of the office to react to his ultimatum. It was clear his dad did not want him. He wanted his money. Bobby was abandoned on the side of the road, penniless. Bobby's life was on hold. He dated a lot of nice girls and wanted a large family, but he chose never to get into a serious relationship until he got things sorted out with his parents. He simply couldn't fathom raising kids if he wasn't on the home farm. During this time in limbo, Bobby's dad was holding onto a stick with a carrot. Bobby would get a significant opportunity off the farm, but then a desperate call from his dad would make him drop everything and come home to Bobcaygeon. When his dad decided he didn't need him, he left his son hanging, and this went on for far too long. One consulting job Bobby did was to put together a 10-year strategic plan for Pfizer Animal Health for the Western Canadian feedlot industry. In another stint, he helped a group of John Deere dealerships in southern Alberta develop a strategic plan for how they were going to market and support new GPS technology when it was just being unboxed in 2005. Yet his dad refused to listen to any of his ideas to improve farm profitability. Working for these companies gave him no purpose, though. For Bobby, life without farming in Bobcaygeon was meaningless. Bobby gave his parents an ultimatum. He threatened to hang himself on his next birthday if his parents didn't get a business and a succession plan for the farm's future sorted out. Both parents were very narcissistic and didn't take him seriously. They cared more about their reputation in the rural community and what everyone in Bobcaygeon thought about them than their son's feelings or his well-being. They stopped returning his calls. They were getting divorced, and they had emotionally divorced him as well in the process. Bobby grew up thinking that his ancestors, who worked tirelessly, had given him the right to farm. Bobby found out the hard way that nobody has the right to farm. It's a rare privilege. While 70% of family farms have success or interested in farming, only 12% pass over the farm to their grandkids. Bobby learned this statistic in college, but he thought his own family becoming this statistic could never ever happen. He felt farming was his birthright. Growing up, he felt that if none of his cousins were going to carry on the family tradition, he was obligated to do so. The year that he took the risk to go to college and get an agriculture business degree, 18 herds of cattle were dispersed in the township, and everyone said, "There is no future in farming." Bobby was a Calvinist who believed his predestination was to be a steward of that farm and the surrounding county, continuing a 7-generation family tradition. Now that he had made the sacrifices to go to college when everyone had told him not to and had studied so hard to figure out a way to solve the farm's business issues, he felt entitled to the opportunity. Yet after Uncle Claude's death, nobody cared to talk sense into his dad, and he felt betrayed that no one seemed to care about the sacrifices he had made to continue the family legacy. He didn't want to kill himself, but his parents had divorced, and the farm had no future. He felt cheated of his destiny. On his birthday, he found himself sitting on a barn beam with a rope around his neck and a rifle in his lap. It was the same .22 rifle he had used as a kid that was sitting just inside the barn door, loaded as always. He had bought a rope in a hardware store a week before, but at the last minute decided to use an old lariat that was hanging on the wall. Some of his favorite childhood memories were the hours he spent practicing roping using the same rope on that thrashed floor. The rope was covered in manure, but it would still hold weight. The heft of the rope as it flew off the tip of his fingers as he threw it over the barn beam was like suddenly feeling the entire weight of the full moon in the sky. Many thoughts flooded Bobby's head as he sat on that barn beam. The barn was eerily silent except for the rain on the steel roof and raccoons rummaging in the granary. After a frustrating decade of trying to save the farm and his parents' marriage, he felt he was out of options. He had just officiated a friend's wedding in Guelph earlier that afternoon and hadn't touched any alcohol. He had driven 3 hours across Toronto through traffic to get back home. He had scheduled the day and the hour of his demise for nearly a year. He was absolutely certain at that moment that he was of sound mind and judgment. For the months leading up to it, he had gone to a psychiatrist to make sure of that, and the doctor said in an East Indian accent, "You've made poor choices in trying to please your parents, but there's nothing wrong with the chemistry in your brain." Beyond his parents, he had told nobody about his threats. He had given what little he had in a church collection plate that night, even though he wasn't Catholic. He didn't know how many hours he sat on that beam, but he was in complete shock that things had gotten so bad that he was in this spot. He didn't want to jump, but he was stubborn and now felt obligated to follow through on his threat. His identity was farming in Bobcaygeon, and without it, who was he? His parents' divorce that year was crushing for him, but a smirk also spread across his face as he realized it was also a great lead-in joke. Word got out that his parents divorced over a fight about a manure spreader. Who couldn't see that humor in that? Bobby became the guy that his friends could come and have a beer with at the end of a long, dysfunctional day farming with their families. People could freely open up to Bobby and spill the emotional roller coasters they were on because they knew Bobby had already been there himself. These stories flooded Bobby's thoughts as he sat there on that barn beam. He suddenly, for the first time, realized he wasn't the only farmer who was struggling with coming home to work with their stubborn dad. Stubborn was a word that just kept on going over and over in his head. He initially thought it was because he was determined to follow through on his threat to his parents. But eventually he walked away from that barn, realizing his new life mission to help stubborn farmers work better together. He didn't understand what this entailed at the time, but he knew it meant there were some radical changes that needed to happen. Bobby's full name is Mark Andrew Junkin of Bobcaygeon, but since college everyone except telemarketers has called him Bobcaygeon or Cajun, because there has never been a kid so proud of where he was from.
But this isn't just any story. I'm Bobby. This is my story.
And this is Bernadette, who just told my husband's story. It's quite the story, I know, but one I hope you can see how genuinely he understands and emphasizes with you. He truly sees this as his life's mission, besides being the best husband and dad, of course. And I think this is what you will come to find as you listen to this book.
My grandpa had a saying, never complain and never explain. Everyone goes through hard times, and I'm not telling you this story to play the victim or to get a pity party. I never told a soul, not even my wife, about this pivotal moment until we lost another farm boy who was my friend's brother to suicide 2 summers ago, and I came out of the closet about my experience. farmers have a higher suicide rate than war veterans returning from Afghanistan, and this statistic has got to stop right now. Mental health is like picking ripe peaches, choosing your thoughts carefully. However, emotional health is how you handle the ones that turn out to be sour. A lot of times we blame farm suicides on mental health, but don't realize that many farmers are struggling with emotional health and don't know how to handle those sour peaches. I truly believe the real root problems that cause many of the emotional health issues in farming are not being addressed. I know what it is like to be frustrated working with family in a family business and the ripple effects it can have on every aspect of your life. Every person considering suicide has different reasons. However, many big farm problems ranging from bankruptcy to divorce to farm succession are often a side effect of a root issue. That root issue is the inability to, and frustration that comes from, not being able to make good decisions together with your family in a family business. This struggle doesn't just affect farmers. It is a problem that a lot of folks from all types of family businesses encounter. Maybe that is you or someone you love. I've never been back to Bobcaygeon since that fateful day, and likely won't until the day my boys spread my ashes. But I have officially taken Bobcaygeon as my middle name because I've become a different man since that day. I have dedicated my life to trying to figure out a different way to fix the root issues to this seemingly impossible problem of how to work with stubborn family members. I've dedicated the last 16 years to figuring out how to turn stubborn from a bad word into a good thing for family farms. I have a few simple, common sense, yet counterintuitive concepts to share with you that any family business can apply. What I'm about to tell you is the solution to stubbornness that I've discovered during the 16 years since I walked away from my family's barn in Bobcaygeon.